Jake Carter had seen some wild things in space, but this was next level. His ship, the Starhopper, was burning, sparking, and making the kind of noises that suggested it wasn't going to stay in the air much longer. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and the computer kept shouting, "MPCT and TNC Gomendes." Jake gritted his teeth. Yeah, I heard you the first time." With a final yank of the controls, he aimed for a patch of rocky desert on the strange planet below. The Starhopper hit the ground hard, skidding across the sand, sending dust and metal debris flying. By some miracle, the ship stayed in one piece. Jake groaned, unbuckled himself, and staggered out of the cockpit. His brown flight jacket was scorched, his dark hair covered in dust. But at least he was alive. Then he heard it. Blaster fire, explosions, shouts in a language he didn't understand. Jake ducked behind a rock, peeking over the edge. A battle was happening just a few hundred feet away. A group of heavily armed mercenaries, big, ugly, and wearing mismatched armor, had surrounded someone. In the middle of them stood a lone warrior, fighting like a demon. She moved with deadly grace, wielding a glowing blade that cut through the air with precision. Despite the injuries on her arm, she fought off the attackers without hesitation. But there were too many. Jake's gut twisted. He didn't know who she was, but it was clear she was outnumbered. He sighed. Why do I always get involved in these things? Grabbing his plasma pistol, he sprinted toward the fight. The mercenaries barely noticed him until he shot the first one in the back. The alien howled, falling face first into the dirt. The others spun around, confused. Jake fired again, hitting a second attacker in the leg. "Who the?" One of them turned to him. Jake grinned. "Just a concerned citizen." The female warrior didn't hesitate. Using Jake's distraction, she cut through two enemies in a single strike. Her movements were precise, controlled. The mercenaries realized they were losing and started to retreat. One last enemy aimed his blaster at her back. Jake didn't think. He just tackled the guy to the ground, punching him hard in the face. The alien groaned, then went limp. Silence fell over the battlefield. Jake got up, brushing dust off his jacket. Well, that was fun. The warrior turned to him. For the first time, he got a proper look at her. Her armor was battle-worn but elegant, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. She stood tall, radiating authority, but her golden eyes, the only thing Jake could focus on, burned with something intense. She stared at him like he had just done something ridiculous and brilliant at the same time. Then, she did the one thing Jake wasn't expecting. She dropped to one knee, pressing a fist to her chest, a sign of deep respect. Jake blinked. Are you okay? I am Xylara, Princess of the Zyrenian Empire." Her voice was smooth, but powerful. "By ancient law, I am now bound to you." Jake tilted his head. "Bound? Like what, I get a medal or something?" Xylara shook her head, eyes unwavering. "No, you saved my life. Now, you are my mate." Jake's brain short-circuited. Wait. What at? Jake Carter had been in some tight spots before, smuggling runs gone wrong, bounty hunters chasing him across asteroid belts. That one time he had to talk his way out of a duel with a 7-foot lizard man. But nothing prepared him for this. "You're joking, right?" he asked, still trying to process what Xylara had just said. The alien princess remained deadly serious. "I do not joke about matters of honor." Jake blinked. "But, mate? As in married?" She nodded. "By the laws of my people, a warrior whose life is saved in battle must bind themselves to their savior. It is an unbreakable vow." Jake ran a hand through his messy dark hair. "Okay, but I'm not one of your people, so this doesn't." Xylara stepped closer, her golden eyes sharp. "Do you reject my honor?" Jake opened his mouth, then quickly shut it. Something told him saying yes would be a very bad idea. Instead, he sighed. "Look, I'm flattered. Really, you seem great, deadly, terrifying, all that good stuff. But I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding." Xylara folded her arms. "You saved my life. You are now my chosen. This is how it has been for generations. Jake shook his head. Where I come from, people don't get hitched just because one person drags the other out of trouble. Xayalera frowned. That is foolish. A mate must be worthy, strong. Her gaze flicked over him, measuring him. Are you saying you are not? Jake groaned. That's not what I... Before he could finish, a deep rumbling sound echoed across the rocky landscape. Jake turned just in time to see a massive warship descending from the sky. Its black hull gleamed under the twin suns, and as it landed, sand and debris flew everywhere. Xayalera's expression darkened. The bounty hunters. Jake muttered a curse. You've got people after you. Many, she admitted, and now they will come for you as well. Of course they will, Jake mumbled, because why not? A loud metallic clank rang out as the warship's ramp lowered. A group of heavily armed aliens stomped down, their armor covered in glowing red markings. Their leader, a hulking brute with cybernetic arms, pointed directly at Jake. There he is. That's the human who interfered. Jake groaned. Wow, news travels fast. The bounty hunter sneered. Hand over the princess, and we might let you live. Jake glanced at Xayalera. So, what's the plan? She drew her glowing blade. We fight. Jake sighed. Yeah, figured you'd say that. The bounty hunters charged. Xayalera moved first, slicing through the air with precision, blocking blaster fire with impossible speed. Jake, meanwhile, did what he did best, survive. Ducking behind a rock, he fired his plasma pistol, taking out one of the attackers. Then another, but there were too many. Xayalera, we might need a better plan, he shouted. She didn't respond, too busy flipping over an enemy and cutting them down. Jake growled. Fine, I'll make a plan myself. His eyes darted toward the bounty hunter's ship. If he could get inside, maybe he could disable it, or better yet, steal it. Diving out of cover, he sprinted toward the open ramp. Blaster fire scorched the air around him. One shot nearly took his head off, but he kept running. Xayalera noticed. Where are you going? Jake grinned, stealing their ride. Before she could argue, he vanished inside the warship. Jake sprinted up the warship's ramp, heart pounding. Stealing a bounty hunter's ship wasn't exactly a safe idea, but at this point, it was safer than staying outside with a dozen blaster-happy mercenaries. Inside, the ship was a mess of glowing control panels, flickering red emergency lights, and a nasty smell that suggested the crew didn't believe in showers. Jake wrinkled his nose and kept moving, heading straight for the cockpit. Outside, Xayalera was still fighting, cutting down bounty hunters with elegant, deadly precision. But even she couldn't take on this many forever. All right, let's see what we're dealing with here, Jake muttered as he slid into the pilot's seat. The controls were definitely not built for human hands. Strange symbols blinked on the screens, and there were way too many buttons. Jake groaned. Why can't aliens just use a normal steering wheel? A loud bang from outside snapped his attention back to the fight. Xayalera was holding her own, but reinforcements were coming. More bounty hunters stormed down from the hills, weapons ready. Great, no pressure. Jake cracked his fingers. Time to fly. He reached out, pressing random buttons and hoping for the best. The ship rumbled to life. Screens flickered, and the thrusters powered up. Outside, Xayalera leaped backward as the ground beneath her shook from the ship's engines. She turned to see the vessel slowly lifting off the ground. Jake, she called. Hang on, he shouted back. With a loud whoosh, the ship shot upward, kicking up a storm of dust and blinding the bounty hunters below. Jake wrestled with the controls, trying to stabilize the craft. Okay, up is good, down is bad. The ship lurched sideways. Correction, sideways is also bad. From below, Xayalera jumped. She grabbed onto the edge of the rising ramp, pulling herself inside just as Jake yanked a lever and sent the ship rocketing into the sky. The bounty hunters fired after them, but it was too late. They were gone. Moments later, Jake exhaled, slumping back in the pilot's seat. Okay, that wasn't so bad. Xayalera stormed into the cockpit, her golden eyes blazing. You stole their ship. Jake smirked. Worked, didn't it? She folded her arms. This is dishonorable. Oh, sorry, princess, he said, flashing a grin. Next time, I'll ask them politely to stop shooting at us. Agilara huffed, but didn't argue. Instead, she inspected the ship's control panel, her fingers moving over the symbols with practiced ease. Jake leaned back, watching her. You know how to fly this thing. She glanced at him. Of course, do you? I got us off the ground, didn't I? Agilara pressed a few buttons, and the ship's screens flashed with new coordinates. We cannot stay in this system. They will come after us. Yeah, I figured. Jake ran a hand through his hair. Any ideas? Agilara hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, We go to my homeworld. Jake blinked. Wait. What? You are my chosen. My people must recognize you. Jake groaned. Okay, seriously, this mate thing is still up for debate. Agilara stepped closer. You saved me. Do you regret it? He looked into her sharp golden eyes. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he muttered, No. She nodded, satisfied. Then, without another word, she turned back to the controls and set a course for her world. Jake rubbed his temples. What had he just gotten himself into? Jake sat in the co-pilot's seat, arms crossed, watching as Agilara expertly piloted the stolen ship toward her homeworld. Stars streaked past the view screen, a blur of silver and blue. He had no idea what to expect when they landed, but he had a feeling it was going to be complicated. So, he said, breaking the silence, what exactly happens when we get there? Agilara didn't take her eyes off the controls. You will meet the High Council. They will judge whether you are worthy. Jake frowned. Worthy? Of what? She glanced at him. Of being my mate. Jake groaned, rubbing his face. Still not agreeing to that. Agilara simply smirked. You may not have a choice. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, the ship's warning alarms blared. Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted airspace. Lower your shields and prepare for inspection. Jake tensed. But, is that normal? Agilara's expression darkened. No, something is wrong. She pressed a few buttons, and a holographic screen appeared, showing a fleet of sleek, silver ships moving toward them in formation. Jake whistled. That's a lot of firepower. Agilara's grip on the controls tightened. This is a war fleet. Jake didn't like the sound of that. Are we at war? No, she said slowly, but someone wants it to look that way. Jake exhaled. Great, just great. Moments later, the stolen ship landed on a massive platform surrounded by towering spires of obsidian metal. Jake followed Agilara down the ramp, his pulse quickening as rows of alien warriors in ceremonial armor lined the path. At the end of the path stood three imposing figures, their expressions unreadable. The High Council. Agilara whispered, Follow my lead. Jake nodded, doing his best to look confident and not like some clueless human who had no idea what was going on. As they approached, the center figure stepped forward. His voice was deep, commanding. Agilara, you return, but not alone. Agilara bowed slightly. This man saved my life. He has earned the right to stand here. The council members exchanged glances. One of them sneered. A human? Your choice is unconventional. Jake held back a sigh. Here we go. The lead counselor turned his gaze on Jake. Tell me, human, do you understand what you have done? Jake crossed his arms. Saved a life? Yeah, pretty sure I got that part. A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. Some looked amused, others offended. The counselor's eyes narrowed. You do not grasp the weight of your actions. By saving Agilara, you have become bound to her. Her fate is now your fate. Jake felt his stomach drop. I'm really gonna need someone to explain that in small, easy-to-understand words. Agilara sighed. It means they expect you to prove yourself in combat. Jake blinked. Come again. The counselor smirked. You will face the trial of strength. Jake groaned. Of course I will. The counselor gestured toward a massive arena beyond the platform. If you survive, we shall speak again." Jake turned to Lara. "Do you guys ever just talk things out?" She gave him a small, almost amused smile. Where would be the fun in that? Jake sighed. He was really starting to regret not staying on Earth. Jake was led into the arena by 2 guards, the weight of the moment sinking in. The ground beneath his boots felt hard and unforgiving, and the crowd surrounding the arena seemed to stretch out forever. Rows of alien warriors sat in the stands, their gazes fixed on him. He couldn't help but feel like a tiny speck under their intense scrutiny. In the center of the arena stood a massive hulking figure, covered in battle armor. He was easily twice Jake's size, with muscles so large they looked like they belonged to a different species. This was his opponent. Jake's heart raced. This was not what he signed up for. "You're up against Klor." Hilara's voice came from behind him. "He is the strongest warrior in our clan. Defeat him, and the council will accept you." Jake turned to her. "Defeat him? Are you out of your mind?" Hilara gave him a flat look. "You're the one who chose to save me. This is the price you pay." Jake groaned. "Great, just great." Before he could protest any further, a loud horn sounded, signaling the start of the trial. Klor let out a roar of triumph and charged at Jake, his massive fists raised. Jake barely had time to react before the giant warrior was upon him. Klor swung his fist, and Jake barely ducked in time, feeling the air whoosh past his head as the punch missed by inches. He took a step back, his mind racing. "I can't outmuscle him." Jake knew he had to think fast. He scanned the arena for anything that might give him an advantage. His eyes fell on a row of sharp, jagged rocks lying nearby, perfect for something sneaky. "All right, let's do this," he muttered to himself. Klor came at him again, this time swinging both fists in a wide arc. Jake ducked and rolled under him, barely avoiding the strike. He quickly grabbed one of the sharp rocks from the ground and hurled it at Klor's legs. The rock hit its target, but Klor barely flinched. Instead, he turned, glaring down at Jake. "Is that all you've got, human?" Jake didn't have the luxury of time to second-guess himself. He had to act, and fast. "Guess I'll have to get creative," he muttered. Jake dodged another strike, this time leaping to the side and using his agility to stay out of Klor's reach. The crowd around the arena roared, watching the human dart around the towering warrior, like a mouse avoiding a hungry cat. Hilara's voice rang out from the stands, her tone firm but encouraging. "You must show them that you are worthy of your place at my side. Show them your heart." Jake's breath caught at her words. It wasn't just about survival now. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for her. Klor charged again, but this time Jake was ready. As Klor swung his fists, Jake darted forward, slipping under Klor's guard. With a quick motion, he grabbed another rock and swung it at Klor's exposed side, striking him in the ribs. The blow wasn't enough to bring the giant down, but it staggered him just enough for Jake to spring into action. He darted behind Klor, using his momentum to kick the back of Klor's knees. The giant warrior stumbled, and Jake immediately followed up with a series of quick jabs to the giant's midsection. Klor growled, trying to regain his balance. He swung around, but Jake was already on the move again. Agility was his advantage, not raw strength. The crowd was on their feet now, cheering and shouting as the battle continued. Jake's heart raced, his every move a desperate attempt to stay alive and win the respect of these alien warriors. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jake saw an opening. Klor had overextended himself, his massive body off balance for just a moment. Jake seized the opportunity, lunging forward and delivering a sharp blow to the side of Klor's neck. Klor faltered, and for the first time, Jake saw the warrior hesitate. He wasn't down, but he was stunned, and that was enough. Jake took a step back, breathing heavily. He wasn't done yet, but he had bought himself a precious moment. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he watched Klor struggle to regain his footing. For a moment, the arena was silent, just the heavy sound of breathing from both fighters. Jake could feel the weight of the moment. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for his place in Xylara's world, for their future. Clore straightened, his broad shoulders heaving as he glared at Jake. The crowd was still, waiting for what would happen next. "You are a tricky one, human," Clore growled, rubbing the side of his neck where Jake had struck him. "But that will not save you." Jake didn't respond. He was too focused on the next move, knowing that any mistake could be his last. Clore launched himself forward, his fists swinging like massive hammers. Jake barely had time to react. He ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, and then dashed to the other side of the arena. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, but it was his only chance to put some distance between them. The crowd roared as Clore followed, his large footsteps shaking the ground. Jake's mind raced. He needed to tire the giant out. He wasn't going to win through brute strength, but he could outlast him. Jake kept his distance, darting and weaving, moving with a speed that Clore's massive body couldn't match. For every swing the giant made, Jake was already several steps ahead, barely avoiding each attack. Shylara's voice rang out from the stands. "You can do this, Jake. Show them the power of Earth." The words echoed in his mind. Earth, his home, his people. He had to fight for them too. For all the unknowns and challenges, Earth had to be his anchor. Jake twisted around a column, narrowly avoiding another swing from Clore, and found himself backed into a corner. Panic rose in his chest for a moment. This was it. He had nowhere to run. But then he saw it, a large metal pole sticking out of the ground nearby. It was sturdy, the perfect weapon. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed it, using the momentum to spin around and strike Clore's chest with all his strength. The impact wasn't enough to knock Clore down, but it made him stagger backward, giving Jake the opening he needed. The crowd gasped, sensing the shift in momentum. Jake knew he had to press the advantage. Clore grunted in frustration, wiping the dirt from his face as he steadied himself. "You fight like a scavenger, not a warrior," he spat. Jake shook his head, grinning despite the exhaustion creeping in. "I'm not a warrior, I'm just smarter than you." The giant's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of doubt in his opponent's expression. Was Clore beginning to question his own strength? It was now or never. Jake charged, brandishing the pole like a weapon, aiming for Clore's side. With a swift jab, he struck the giant again, and this time, Clore stumbled, falling to one knee. Jake didn't wait for him to recover. He rushed forward, using the pole to deliver a series of precise blows to Clore's vulnerable spots. His ribs, his knees, his shoulders. The giant was no longer the unstoppable force he had been at the start of the fight. With one final blow to Clore's temple, Jake watched as the giant collapsed, falling onto the hard ground with a thud. The arena went dead silent. Then, in a burst of cheers, the crowd erupted. Jake stood there, panting, holding the pole in his hands as Clore lay on the ground, defeated. He had done it. But as the cheers filled the air, a sudden weight pressed down on Jake's chest. The victory felt empty without Sci-Fi at his side. He turned, searching the stands for her. Sci-Fi's eyes met his, and for a moment, everything else faded away. She was smiling, not the usual smirk, but something softer, warmer. It wasn't just a smile of approval. It was something deeper, something that spoke of respect, admiration, and something more. As the crowd continued to cheer, Jake made his way toward Sci-Fi. She stood up from her seat, her gaze fixed on him, and Jake couldn't help but feel a rush of emotions. "You did it," she said softly as he approached. Jake was out of breath, his body sore from the fight, but the look in her eyes made everything worth it. He grinned, his heart racing for a different reason now. "I guess you were right. I had to fight to win your respect." Sci-Fi's eyes softened. "You've earned more than my respect, Jake. You've earned my heart." Jake blinked, taken aback. Was she serious? Before he could say anything, Sci-Fi took a step closer, her voice low and full of meaning. "But there's still one more trial left. This time, it's not about strength. It's about trust." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant, but whatever it was, he wasn't about to back down now. "Bring it on," he said, ready for whatever came next. Jake stood beside Sci-Fi in the center of the grand hall, feeling a strange mix of pride and nervousness. The cheers from the arena had barely faded before she pulled him aside, her eyes serious. "You did well, Jake," she said softly, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. "But the hardest part is yet to come." Jake's heart beat faster. What could be more difficult than defeating Kalor in a fight? He had done the impossible, but now there was something in her voice that told him it was just the beginning. "What's the next challenge?" he asked, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. Sci-Fi didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned and motioned for him to follow her. They walked through a series of long, quiet hallways, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The air felt thick with tension, as though the weight of everything was pressing in on him. Finally, they reached a small, secluded chamber. Inside, there was nothing but a single stone pedestal in the center of the room, a glowing crystal resting on top. "This is the trial of trust," Sci-Fi said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "The crystal will test your heart, Jake. You must place your hand on it and show the true depth of your feelings for me." Jake blinked, confused. "You want me to touch the crystal?" Sci-Fi nodded. "But it's not as simple as that. The crystal will bring your deepest fears and doubts to the surface. If your feelings are not true, it will reveal your inner weaknesses." Jake hesitated. He had no idea what kind of trick this was, but it didn't sound like something anyone would risk if they weren't serious. Looking at Sci-Fi's face, he saw nothing but determination. She believed in this. "I have nothing to hide," he said firmly, stepping forward. "I'm ready." Sci-Fi stepped aside, her gaze never leaving him. "Then do it, Jake. Prove your heart is as strong as your will." Jake's hand trembled slightly as he reached out to touch the crystal. The moment his fingers brushed against its smooth surface, a sudden jolt ran through his body. A deep, cold voice echoed in his mind. "Are you sure?" the voice asked. "Are you sure you belong here, human?" Jake's breath hitched, and his hand pulled back for a moment. Doubt washed over him like a wave. Could he really do this? Could he really become a part of this world, this alien society? Did he deserve Sci-Fi's trust, her respect? He closed his eyes, shaking his head to clear the thoughts. He couldn't let himself fall into the trap of doubt. He had to prove himself, not just to the people of this world, but to Sci-Fi. Taking a deep breath, Jake reached for the crystal again, this time with more confidence. As soon as his fingers touched the surface, a flood of images filled his mind. There were visions of Earth, his home, his family, his life before all this madness. He saw his parents, his friends, the quiet moments of his old life that seemed so far away now. Then the images shifted, showing him beside Sci-Fi. He saw her standing tall, proud, and fierce, but there was also something more, a soft trust in her eyes, something he hadn't fully realized until now. He saw himself fighting, not just for his life, but for her, for a future they could share. The fear, the uncertainty, it all disappeared in that moment. He knew what his heart wanted. He knew what he had to do. "I belong here," Jake whispered, his voice steady now. "And I belong with you." The moment the words left his lips, the crystal began to glow brighter, enveloping his hand in a warm light. The voice in his mind faded, leaving only a sense of peace. When Jake removed his hand, the crystal slowly dimmed and then fell silent. Sci-Fi was watching him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was no sound except the beating of his own heart. Jake held his breath, unsure of what would happen next. Then, to his surprise, Sci-Fi smiled, a smile that was full of relief, warmth, and something deeper that Jake couldn't quite place. "You've done it," she said quietly. "You've passed the trial of trust." Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "So, that's it. I did it." Sci-Fi nodded, her eyes softening. "You did more than that. You proved you're worthy of this world, and of me." Jake's heart swelled with emotion. He had done it, and now, with Sci-Fi by his side, there was no turning back. But as he gazed into her eyes, a new feeling arose. The journey ahead was still full of unknowns, and it wasn't over yet. He was ready to face whatever came next, together with Xylura. The sun set low over the alien city, casting long shadows over the grand palace. The air was thick with anticipation, and Jake could feel it in his bones. This was it. After everything they had been through, the battles, the misunderstandings, the victories, everything had led up to this moment. The final test. Xylura stood beside him, her presence as strong as ever, but there was a certain tension in the air. Her gaze was focused on the horizon, her eyes filled with thoughts Jake couldn't fully understand. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady but soft. Jake took a deep breath. "I'm ready, but what exactly is this test? Why does it feel like we're about to change everything?" Xylura looked at him then, her expression serious. "This test isn't just about you, Jake. It's about us. About what we've built together. It will test our bond, our trust, and our ability to fight for the future we want." Jake nodded. That was exactly what had been on his mind. Everything up until now had been a series of challenges, fights, trials, misunderstandings. But this wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This was about choosing a future, his future, with Xylura. "I won't back down," Jake said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Xylura smiled, a small but reassuring smile that warmed him. "I know you will, and I'll be right beside you, Jake. We're in this together." The two of them turned and made their way toward the center of the palace, where the council of Xylura's people had gathered. It was a vast chamber, filled with leaders from various clans, all seated in a large circle. Their eyes were all on Jake as he stepped forward, feeling like every pair of eyes was judging him. The high leader of the council, a tall and imposing figure, rose to his feet. His voice echoed throughout the room. "Jake, you have proven yourself in battle, in trust, and in heart. But now, you must prove yourself in the most important way. Will you accept the role of protector for Xylura, and by extension, for this world? Will you give up everything you know for a future you cannot yet see?" Jake's heart pounded. He had been prepared for this. He had thought about it, considered it from every angle. But now, standing here, facing the council, the weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. Xylura stepped forward, her eyes locked on him, her expression both hopeful and uncertain. Jake knew what this meant for her. This wasn't just about duty. This was about her faith in him. "I've already made my choice," Jake said, his voice strong. He reached for Xylura's hand and held it in his. "I choose you. I choose this world. I choose a future where we can fight together, not just for survival, but for something better." The room was silent for a moment, but then, to his surprise, the high leader nodded, his face unreadable. Slowly, the other council members followed suit, their approval obvious in the way they lowered their heads in respect. Xylura's grip tightened around Jake's hand, and for a moment, he thought he saw something in her eyes, something like relief, like a weight had been lifted. The high leader stepped forward again. "Very well, the choice is made. The future of our people, and of your bond with Xylura, is now in your hands." Jake felt a rush of emotion, a mix of pride and fear, but most of all, hope. He had chosen, and no matter what came next, he would face it with Xylura by his side. As the council session came to a close, Jake and Xylura left the chamber together, the door closing softly behind them. Outside, the night sky stretched above them, full of stars. Xylura turned to him, her expression soft but intense. "I knew you could do it." Jake smiled, his heart swelling with everything he felt for her. "I couldn't have done it without you, Xylura. You've taught me so much, about trust, about strength, about love." She stepped closer to him, her face inches from his. "This isn't the end, Jake. It's just the beginning. Our journey together is only starting." Jake's heart raced as he looked into her eyes, the weight of the future finally feeling like something he could carry. Together, they could face anything. "Then let's make it count," he whispered, his hand finding hers again. And as they stood there, under the alien stars, they knew one thing for certain. No matter what came next, they would face it together.